This is a video explaining what a carburetor is and how it works. But before we get into what it does and what it is, there are some key concepts that we need to understand. All internal combustion engines work through a mixture of fuel and air. The perfect mixture for that, the perfect ratio is 14.7 to 1, 14.7 units of air to 1 unit of fuel. You can measure those however you'd like, as long as you use the same unit for both of them. So keep it simple. Let's use cubic centimeters. So for each 14.7 cubic centimeters of air, you need to have 1 cubic centimeter of fuel. The purpose of a carburetor is to provide the engine with that mixture of fuel and air. A carburetor works on the concept of vacuum. Imagine this is a piston and rod. So a 4-stroke motor has intake, compression, combustion, and exhaust. Something very important is that as the motor is going through its 4 cycles, the piston moves up and down. When the piston is moving down, it creates a vacuum headed towards the motor. It pulls air towards it as it's moving. Carburetors are very, very simple. For motorcycles, which is what we're diving into right now, there's 2 main kinds. There's a CV carburetor and there is a slide carburetor. In both kinds, you do not control the amount of fuel that you're providing the engine with. You control the amount of air. When you're rolling onto the throttle, on or off, the more you roll on it, the more air you provide. You roll off of it, the less air you provide. That gets achieved through this guy here. It's upside down. This guy here. This is what's called a butterfly. A butterfly on CV carburetors sits at the end of the venturi, which I'm going to explain what that is in a moment. And pretty much this is idling. Okay, and as you're giving it throttle, you're doing this. Okay, right there you're at full throttle. On this end, this is where the head would be, so this would be where the piston would be moving down. As it moves down, it's pulling air, and it pulls air through this big orifice here. This is the body of the carburetor, and this is that thing that I called a venturi. Okay, so a venturi is a tube of sorts that starts out at a diameter, then it shrinks down to a point where it becomes as small as it gets, and then it expands a little back up. So kind of like a funnel, but instead of just shrinking and ending, it expands back up. So here you can see how it starts out big, shrinks, it's probably at its smallest around here, then it comes back out, and this is a little bigger, but it's still smaller than the starting opening. As you're rolling onto the throttle, air is flowing through the venturi because of the vacuum that's being created by the motor. The purpose of the venturi is to accelerate the speed at which the air is moving through the body of the carburetor. And what that achieves is it creates a pressure differential, which creates a vacuum. At the bottom of the carburetor, you have what's called the bowl and float. This is a float, just like your toilet float. And then here, usually there's a container that's called a bowl. That's where fuel sits. I don't know if you can see that or not, but on that area, there's a needle, which opens and closes an orifice that feeds fuel to the bowl. Fuel is coming in, and this floats in liquid, so eventually it gets to a point, let's say about there, where no more fuel can come in because the valve is closed. And as fuel is consumed, this lowers back down and more fuel comes in. That's happening constantly as long as your motorcycle is running. It's self-adjusting. Fuel has to have a way to get from the bowl to the venturi, which is where it flows as it mixes with the air to go into the motor. That component is called a jet. And you can think of a jet, which that's what these are, as a straw. It's just a cylinder that has an orifice through it. That orifice is fixed. The orifices start here at the bottom of the bowl, and then they go all the way into the venturi. You can see them protrude through there. Right, I'm going to touch one right here. There's one, there's another. As the air being pulled by the vacuum of the motor passes through the venturi, it accelerates, creates a vacuum which literally sucks the fuel from the bottom here at the bowl through the orifice into the venturi and inside the motor. Another key point is those jets, those straws, remember I said that the orifice is fixed? That means that they can only flow a certain volume of fuel at any given time. So you have two main systems in a carburetor. You have your idle jet and you have your main jet. Your idle jet, like it says, is what's used from when the motorcycle is starting and idling up until about 25% gas. Your main jet is what kicks in once you're above 25% gas. Remember how I said that these flow a fixed amount of liquid at any given time? The main jet is big enough to be able to provide the motor with enough fuel at wide open throttle. So the main jet is big enough to work not here or here or here or here or here, but here. Okay, that main jet is big enough to give you enough fuel when you're doing this, wide open. That brings us to a problem. What happens here? Or what happens here? You know, all of this. Say this is idle, so this is the idle jet. And let's call this 25%. The main jet kicks in. From here to here, all right, that's too much fuel because that's meant for enough fuel for this. Here would be too much. How do we fix that? We tackle that issue with the other essential part of a carburetor, which is the slide and needle. This is very self-explanatory. This is a slide. It slides up and down through the body of the carburetor here. Let me see if I can show you. Like so. All right, it slides up and down, okay? And then there's the needle. And I don't know how well you can see this or not, so you're just gonna have to trust me. The needle starts at a certain diameter and then it tapers down. Here, it's thinner than here at the top. And this sits like so, inside of the main jet, okay? So that needle at its widest is totally covering the main jet. No fuel can get through there. And again, this, in this case, because this is a CV carburetor, which that stands for constant velocity. As you're given a vacuum by doing this, okay? Vacuum is flowing through the venturi and picking the slide up, okay? Now what happens when the slide gets picked up? The needle starts covering less and less and less of the main jet, okay, because it tapers down. And eventually, when you're at wide open throttle, this is picked up as far up as it can, and the needle is no longer covering the main jet. So all the fuel that you need, it's flowing through. So this is a demonstration of how a carburetor works through creating vacuum by accelerating air through the venturi. Imagine the bottom part of the bottle is the bowl. Then here where the straw is exposed, that's the venturi, and the straw itself is a jet, okay? And this is compressed air, which is accelerated air. So you're gonna go start it, and this is what happens. And that is pretty much how a carburetor works. Through vacuum, there's fuel at the bottom, and there's those fixed orifices, which the main orifice is big enough to provide you with enough fuel for when you're wide open, but then it's too big for whenever you're at any less than that. Okay, remember you want to keep that 14.7 to 1. So the way we tackle that is through the slide and needle. Right here, the main jet is totally covered. As you give it throttle, give it more air, which creates more vacuum, which picks this up. Fuel can come in, a little more, a little more, a little more, until it's no longer being covered. That's wide open, and then it gives you all the amount of fuel that you need. And that's it. Hope this helps you understand how your motorcycle runs.